Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Seth, you know how many times you do that? You do like a deep breath every single time. I hear it every single time. It's like, I'm going to speak now.
Is it every time? Right,
it's pretty often. I do hear it. You get ready, like you're ramping up. Like you got to, get that fresh breath of air. Yeah, exactly. I think the ASMR of that is incredible. Yeah. And I'm sure everyone listening online is loving that sound. Awesome.
I don't know if you're telling me to keep on doing it or shut up.
Not do it.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
I do have an article that is kind of an opener or topic. Yes, Seth?
Oh, man.
Oh, boy. We're in trouble now. I have an article that has come across the Microsoft Fabric blog. I guess all things would be Microsoft Fabric because it's Microsoft. But the Fabric blog has now released a new option here, or a new feature that enables you to create a library inside your Spark notebook. I find this to be very interesting. So the feature specifically is you can evaluate a measure from a data model and bring dimensions and measures, or write an evaluation statement that will let you return data in your notebook from your data models. The thought being is if you're doing data science things, or you're doing data engineering things, or you're trying to train a model, there's likely business logic that has been locked inside the model, the cube. So if you're testing something, if you're trying to produce tables of data to train against, you've already cleaned the data, you've already shaped it, related it to measures, or you've taken the relationships and built dimension tables. So you now have this kind of hopefully cleaned data set that's what the data scientists want to work from. So they want to regain that logic, or that business logic. If you do anything in Power Query, like those steps are lost inside notebooks. So with this feature, you're able to go back into a Spark notebook and request data back out from a data model. I haven't had a lot of time to spend testing it. It looks very promising, assuming from what the blog article has read and a little bit of testing I've done, where I'm able to select a couple very simple things from a data model. For your reactions, I'm curious, Tommy, Seth, what do you think? Is this something that you would see us using in the future?
I think this is something that a lot of people have been asking for with all the notebook tools. I think also with data engineering, because you could technically just take something from a data set, right? From a Power BI data set, the tables, and make it a data frame. This actually solves a big need when it comes to, I know that there's a lot in the managed self-service space. They have the data scientist, and they want to work off of obviously the data set. And they are like, well, we have the tables. Power BI data sets are don't really solve that for us. We need those tables.
Yep.
Well, now we can have a cleaned Power BI data set that they can use for data science, machine learning, and output, which is kind of incredible.
It's a full round robin. I mean, this is just, so what I see at Fabric is inside Fabric, anything can link to anything. And this is where there's like a web of data occurring here, right? You can make a data flow, and then you can land it in your lake, and then the lake can be referenced in multiple workspaces, meaning there's many data sets. There's so many linkages between different things here. I really think that organizations at a minimum need to think about how they plan to distribute and share the information across the organization. Because this, to me, just echoes one more area of, if you change your certified or your data model, any changes to that data model potentially could break notebooks now, because now a notebook is now yet another source of data where the data could come out. You know what I mean? So that's where my head kind of goes. I love the idea. I just also think this also requires us to be more diligent around our governance.
Yeah, I agree with both. I agree with both the points, right? Like, I like it because it allows you to connect to the calculations, right? And there's a lot going on in DAX calculations and models potentially. Like, a little less probably in Power Query if we're, sourcing stuff back into notebooks, but who knows? But yeah, there's a lot of business logic. There's a lot of different things that if you can just plug into those outputs, much in the same way that, like, as you were talking and describing the feature, you're already doing for like embedded scenarios, right? Like a developer can go pull a measure from a model right now anyway. But to pull it back into data systems, that's pretty cool. But the other side of that, Mike, like you just spoke to, is I don't like that spider web of dependencies. And are we creating a model for a report, or is the model for a report and data? Like now
Yep.
we've got
Yep.
a thing that is
Oh, that's a good point.
playing two different roles, and
Yes.
that's where I think you have to be much more thoughtful about like making sure you have an understanding of how it's being used, so that, to your point, you don't change something for the report and all of a sudden take out a whole series of other data science calculations or other things that are happening in the notebooks because your data set is now a data source for somebody else, right?
Fully agree. The other thing I see in the article here, as you look towards the bottom of it, there's the other thing here. One of the questions I have, especially when I'm looking at trying to, let's imagine I'm writing code against a data model, right? What is the challenge you would have? I don't know what the measures are doing, and I don't know where the relationships are inside the model. What tables link to what? Like, what factual pieces should I understand? So there is another, you can explore and validate some of your data too. There is another one, you can ensure your data quality is having, accurate queries here, but you can run a fabric.list relationships, and then it will actually be able to plot the relationships, or plot relationships underscore metadata, and it produces a visualization maybe around the tables and the relationships between them, which that I think is very important when you're trying to expose. So one of the challenges I think I find for users who are building thin reports against a data model is there's very little documentation to them to understand which measures, which are dimensions, which ones are facts. Once you start understanding that concept, I think it makes it much easier for external or thin report builders to create reports. Because you do have to understand the context of the model. And not every model is a very simple star schema. They get complex. There's tables that jump. There's tables that go between different things, right? So having some kind of documentation around that is very helpful. And I think this is going to potentially ease some of that inside the context of a notebook. So that'll be interesting. This also potentially begs the question of, why not make a notebook to touch all of your data sets and rip out all of the relationships across all data sets in your entire organization? Like, I do see this as potentially being another opportunity here to document a lot more of what's going on in your data ecosystem, potentially. Right? Can I use this notebook to go grab out all the functions? Can I use this notebook to go grab all the relationships across all my models? Maybe. That would be interesting. So I still have to explore it a bit more. We'll kind of get into more in the future, I guess. But for now, good article. The article link is in the chat, and it also is in the description of this video in case you want to go check it out later. On to our main topic for today. Tommy, give us a quick introduction on our main topic. So we're picking something from a great visualization company called Storytelling with Data, and this is their kind of their article today. Kind of walk us through, guide us through. Tommy, what's the topic for today?
So the title of the article is called "Showing Insights or Showing Off," or reverse showing off. And we've talked about visuals and getting advanced with themes, with colors, with the functionality in Power BI. But I think we haven't really focused on how advanced we can get from the visual point of view. This is a constant conflict, I think, that we all have in the BI space, where we don't want things to be too simple, where it's all bar charts and maybe some conditional formatting because it looks too basic. So we kind of say, like, how can we flash it up a little to actually show, like, look at all the insights and functionality here that I'm a Power BI pro. Especially for us, like, we're at Microsoft MVPs. We should know everything and do everything in the visuals. However, the idea of, when we've talked about the audience considerations, where what is simple, what is insightful, and what is showing off for the sake of showing off. The author here, and I believe the author of the blog here, is Mike Serinos, but I think they're also the people who work with the book from Cole Newsbomber, the storytelling with Cole Knaflack. Yes. well, middle name is in the book title. So I don't know if you have the middle name. Usually, you want to mention them. Cole Nussbaumer Knaflack, who has the very famous book Storytelling with Data. I think it's off their site and basically just goes over for audience the power of simple visuals. It's not just from the audience point of view, but it's ensure that it goes back to catering the audience's understanding.
And this is a good article.
I was leaning into the last name because Mike Cisneros. I think if it's CI, I would imagine it's not Cisneros. Just want to call out the actual names of the authors.
Seth's better with words. I would trust Seth on this one. Seth's good with words.
Maybe that's why I have to breathe so heavily.
you need all the oxygen for the reading. I love it. So I can't quite tell. Is this, and maybe this is just my opinion of this, this article feels to be written to seasoned data developers is what I think it's written to. And the reason I'm going to state that is because there's halfway through this article, it starts talking about, right, you start building visuals, right, as being one who wants to study their craft. You go out and you research and you go find other visuals that are cool and you look across, oh, look at that. Carrie, I forgot the last name, Carrie, who does all the Deneb stuff, has built this amazing Beatles, album visualization using Deneb. I'm like, whoa, this is awesome. Like, this is cool. How could I use something like that? I'm like, there's no real world visual that I would have a report around that's going to need a Beatles album cover that are going to rotate, songs and data types across like looking like a record, right? But it's really cool. So being one who likes to study what other people are creating across the space, it really helps for me to listen to this. But at some point, right, the normal, I'm going to build another bar chart. This is another scatter plot. Like I use those all the time. And so I feel like at some point I get a little bored with the same old visual every single time. And I'm looking to try to spice things up a bit by looking at getting a different visual. Thanks, Power BI Park. Yeah, Carrie Koslow, you caught the name there. So Carrie has amazing library of Deneb reports and visuals, and she inspires me. Like, I love what she builds. It's awesome looking and it's beautiful. But I want to see that in every report, and I have to recognize to myself, sometimes I'm just being showy or just overdoing the visuals, and I'm not really thinking about what is the insight, what do I care about, and how can I just straight up simplify my message. And it's a lot of know your audience, right? I can read a lot, probably different visuals than other people can who haven't had a lot of time studying visuals. So what is the visual language that we're going through? Like, has my audience been trained on data visualization? So this is where my mind kind of goes. And I think this article speaks a lot to me around, Michael, just keep it simple. Don't overdo it. Build solid visuals to insights. And then there's always going to be opportunities. If you get bored, find a side project. Do the fun stuff there, maybe.
So that resonates, I think, with what Mike is saying in the article, right? Which I agree with. Obviously, he's got many, many years in this visualization space. Same experience, and the temptation is very real for you to want to just branch out and try different things. I think the other one that I thought about is a slightly subtler one that could be a trap, which is it is really important for us to continually stay up to date on the new visualizations for Power BI, right? All the time, new things are getting added, and I've
new KPI cards, for example.
I found myself in situations where I'm like, oh, like it's the new thing. I want to use this now, and I want to and there's added complexity to it that is the challenge here, where selecting a visual because it's cool or because it's new potentially creates issues with the audience. And I think that's the pivotal point here, is like you have, when choosing things, we always have to be cognizant that we're choosing for the audience and not choosing for ourselves.
That's the point of the article, honestly. Choosing for know your audience, know what they can handle. And you have to ask, I think this is a part of the discovery part of when you're talking about a report. You need to discover these kind of things. I also think sometimes you just bend to the will of the report consumers, right? When they're like, yeah, we just want the pie chart. Yeah, we just want a donut chart. Sure. Okay, I don't really recommend it, but since you're asking, I'll give it to you. Like, if that's how you want to consume the data, I have preferences around that, but I'm not going to push it or force it too hard because, in my case, they're paying me to build them the report. So like, I'll recommend it not, but if they still want it, yeah, I'll give it to you.
But I think that lies the point. Is it tempting though for you guys? Obviously we've talked about this with the cognitive load for users, but isn't it tempting to like create more flashy visuals? Yes, we can stay standard with the standard theme, the standard colors. But do you have the temptation, or where does that arise when you're like, man, I really should do something else on this report page because every page here is a bar chart and a table and a KPI card?
I like how you're using temptation, Tommy. It's like, are you tempted?
Yeah, there's
are you enticed? Are you enticed by the visuals on the report?
Exactly.
well, let's take a step back and break this down, right? I think for us that deal with a lot of different types of visualizations, and I'm not even an expert in all of them, right? In terms of displaying them, if we look at the sunburst plot, or whatever the gauges that he's created in the report, and he goes into like comparing them on a basic level. Like aesthetically, they look great, but what are the challenges around them that are difficult for people to understand? Right? Like I think what I want to do is break down, like, there are difficulties or things in visuals that people are not familiar with and they don't know how to read them. And I think that's what we're trying to convey, right?
Yeah, and I think the idea here is my principle here is, we've talked about this in the past around the visuals, and the combination of visuals are our language. Instead of writing words about what's going on, we're trying to communicate through what is this visual showing you or representing to you. So I think having, questions like, and if you look in the article, he starts talking about, there's two charts here talking about public schools, teachers per child for all the regions, Northwest, Midwest, South, and West. What they're doing there is there's, again, even in those two bar charts that they have going on there is too much information with the colors. You're being too distractive with everything. So instead of doing that, you can then focus on a separate visual, or changing the visual language slightly and highlighting the lowest students, or the teachers that have the lowest amount of students per teacher, and the ones that have the highest amount of students. So the message here is, what you're trying to say is, what are you trying to convey with this visual? The message is, look at these states, they need more teachers. Or look at these states, they have low teacher to student ratios, if that's what you expect, right? So the message is something beyond just look at how many, here's information, right, as opposed to here's the insight, and here's the key point I want you to walk away from. And I think that's thinking through those key points, or what I think we would call them insights, right? What is the insight I want to give you when you walk away from that visual? I'm looking at that visual going, oh my gosh, Arizona, California, and Utah have really high teacher to student ratios. Take that for what you will. You can interpret from that what you want, but are those places you want to live, and do you want to have that many students per teacher? And then you can go into other things like, how does that study, pan out? Does that make sense? Do you want students with high teacher ratios? Do you not? I mean, that's another whole conversation. But the idea here is the pointing out of, here are locations that you could live that have those higher ratios or lower ratios.
So let me ask this question in a different way, right?
Yeah.
In the example in this article, it is one of those black and white examples of like, hey, we have these two visualizations, and if we want to compare them or contrast and see what like the actual insights of comparing these two data sets together is, which he does later on in the article in two bar charts, we wouldn't choose those two visuals. You wouldn't. because it's very difficult to do exactly what he's outlining. It's very difficult to do a comparison of like, how do these things line up?
Agree.
So I guess I don't know if I like the example, but I get it, because I guess my follow-up question is here, because if I'm selecting a set of visuals, right, for comparison, I'm not going to land in these two, right? But I might land in some others that are challenging to the audience to others understand versus a bar chart. You know what like? So I think what I'm driving at is, how does somebody know when you have a selection of like, you could go to 2-3 different visuals, and 2 of those are like, you have a standard, you have a bar chart, and then you have one that is like slightly harder to understand, and then you have a harder one, but maybe the harder one produces a little bit more insight visually. It's just, you have to walk through it. When should you push your audience? Like, we keep talking about these really complex ones versus bar chart, but I think there's the nuance of like, there's some things in here that where, and I'm like, off the top of my head, I can't think of like a great example, but when should you push your audience a little bit to handle a visual they might not be familiar with, to reinforce what you're trying to communicate with the data?
Let me give you a kind of a vanilla, Tommy. Sorry, before I give an example, Tommy, maybe you want to say something.
I think if we were always play the cognitive load theory, where we're always going to build everything based on the basics, then we always would have the bar chart. So when do you push people? I think it's either it's a slow release, or my first thought, Seth, was that it's on a very specific use case for a very specific like ask that someone has. Like, we're trying to see new users with all these conditions, and there's no visual that cuts it, so we introduce it there. But then I was thinking about that, I'm like, those are so few and far between. I go back to like, when does a other type of visual, like let's say the sunburst visual, right? When does that have a better purpose or serve a better purpose than a normal bar chart? Is it just to display the data, or for someone to actually view?
Let me. I'm gonna maybe answer your question, Tommy. Maybe not. I'm not sure so. If we know our audience, right? So certain audiences, I think we would all kind of agree. People are very familiar, whether you're looking at newspaper articles or other things. I think people are fairly comfortable looking at a bar chart and understanding and interpreting what's going on there. Pretty basic. I think when we're trying to add other things, and let me give you an example that I was kind of thinking about earlier, was let's imagine you have a theme park, right? In your theme park, you're trying to advertise and fill up that theme park so that enough people are in that theme park. So you have a set limit all the time, right, of how filled up that theme park should be. And so the idea is you're trying to get to a target, or you're looking at which customers at that theme park are spending the most amount of money. So do we spend more time on these customers that spend more money or not? So there's other concepts here where you may say, well, what we want to do is the number of days before the theme park opens, or that day, whatever that is, we want to make sure we have enough tickets sold for that day. So you're always kind of walking up to that moment in time where we need to fill up the capacity of our theme parks. So, as you look at graphing like that, or you look at this, you could do a plot or a scatter plot around the idea or the concept of, okay, how many days away from the opening of the theme park? What's the percent filled of that theme park, right? And so if you plotted that on a graph, you could actually say, in regions of the graph on that XY coordinate, you could say, here's an area where we have a few days until the park opens, and we have low fill rate. We have low amounts of tickets sold for that, for those particular days. Looking at the graphics in a two-dimensional space now really helps you focus your attention down to, these are the days or promotions we need to run to be able to focus your attention, or focus the sales team to sell more tickets to fill up those days inside the theme park, right? So a new graphic like that is interesting to think about, right? It probably even answers the question the right way. how do we fill up our theme park fully every day that we're open? But what I think we lose from this is when we're always used to looking at bar charts, there's a leap, there's a knowledge share, there's some kind of thinking we have to kind of convey to the end user that we need to educate them with, bring them along for the ride. So I think when we're trying to use more elaborate visuals, this is where a page potentially could help with a couple examples of here's what this visual is showing you. Here's how you might want to interpret this, right? So I think there's potentially portions here where, we just kind of throw out reports and say, we're good to go, we're done, move on. But I can't underestimate the value of if we're trying to push the boundary of our audience and trying to give them something more that we feel is insightful and that really helps them analyze their data or really gets them to the end objective, in this case, filling up my theme park, we have to bring them along for the ride. We have to explain why that visual is there. And then over time, people can then start using that and it becomes their new frame of reference, right? We've now changed part of the people part of our people, process, and technology. We're skilling up the people so they can handle better visuals. So to your point, Tommy, like where's the line, right? I think the line is ever shifting. I think you try and use visuals that mean good things to your team and your team members, but I think you always try and push that boundary a little bit. And as you're doing that, you have to remember to bring people along for the journey, bring them into that discovery and think through it and add, here's other ways you can look at your information. I think simple principles could be like, position and direction, right? In this example here, you see public school teachers per child. Maybe there's other things you want to look at. Spend per state, right? Maybe the spend in Vermont is much higher for their teachers program versus what you have in Arizona or California. So therefore they have a lot more people, but they also have a lot more money per person to be able to afford more teachers per person, right? Something along, or, there's other factors that may be going in here that you may want to also convey in addition to just showing just a pure number by each column on the bar.
But at the same time, so let's do this scenario. You begin to push people, let's say it's a custom visual, or let's say even the tree map, right? I think that one doesn't get enough love and it's not a very common visual you see in reports. Utilizing the tree map, you introduce that to users for a specific use case. Well, does that need to become, in a sense, part of the lexicon or the visual lexicon for users where it can't be just in one report? It has to then be in multiple reports, right? Like if we're going to use one particular visual or one type of
this is a great point, Tommy. Yeah, I like this. Like what's the reusability of these things but this is where the style I think comes into it, right? This is where the visual language, right, makes sense, right? This is where leaders or BI leaders in their company should be, to your point, Tommy, exactly. We should be focusing on how do we want to convey data? And this is why the IBCS standard exists, the International Business Communication Standard, IBCS. I think is what I think I said it wrong. I think I got the letters out of order there. But IBCS is like a standard. You can adopt it if you want, but it's a great way of communicating. People have studied this. People have figured this stuff out. You don't have to go figure it out for yourself. But this is a way for companies to communicate value on top of their data. And the idea is here are specific ways. If you're trying to share this kind of information, here's a way to represent it. If you're trying to share this kind of information, here's a way to represent it. And that way, as you think about those visuals, you can actually sit down with the team and like figure it out together, right? You're actually at a point where you're saying, we understand how these work. Everyone understands the nature of the visual. And then in multiple reports, you're seeing the same thing over and over again. To your point, Tommy, right? If the tree map is going to be part of your visual language, we should be thinking about how we can incorporate it in an elegant way in multiple reports. And I think as report builders, we get bored and we keep switching things up all the time. And switching things up all the time for a company isn't necessarily a good thing. You get people lost. Like you've been given them bar charts and all of a sudden now a new chart shows up and no one's seen it before. So how do you again, the cognitive load, you slow down. What is it trying to tell me? Try to understand it. And if you don't have helps or if you don't do training with that report moving forward, maybe users just ignore it. I don't understand it. I'll just move on. Just give me my table of data and I'll go from there.
think the point that is being made here that is resonating, right, is as you're increasing the visual challenges potentially, right, or opening up new visuals to the audience, you have to be much more intentional about how you're presenting them, right? And that goes back to like documenting or showing how to read a visual, right? And it's almost like a link off a page or something, or creating a repository of like, hey, if you don't know how to, read this visual, or if you want more information, you have to have that supporting documentation along with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would agree with those.
Let's throw in the link in the chat window here is talking about the IBCS standards here, and there's actually a lot of really great resources inside here that you can look at. What is a scatter chart? What is a bubble chart? Let's talk about a tree map. What does a vertical waterfall look like? Small multiples, and it gives kind of examples or standards of these things. Really, I think helping. Again, the idea is, does our audience understand these visuals? And I think to the article, I think a lot of times I start trying to get showy and fancy and throw very pretty things at people, which is good, but that also detracts a lot away from like the simple messaging of the report. What are we trying to compare?
Is there a reverse? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, there's a reverse component to this too, right? Where if you're not familiar with other visuals, I would say like there's still a lot of value in becoming much more familiar with other visuals and what they have to offer, because it broadens your horizons to be able to choose the right visual, right? A bar chart is very simple and can the simple visuals that everybody is used to are the most popular because they're the easiest to understand, and the vast majority of our data fits into those visuals in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
you can show things quickly and easily through them, but there are certainly cases where some of the more advanced visuals, especially in the Power BI realm, are very useful. So like I want to make sure that we're not conveying like, hey, it's always the basics or nothing. But when you do elevate to different types of visuals, I think what we're saying is it's important to bring the audience along for the ride instead of making assumptions that they're just going to understand it. Because like one of the other things to think about is the more complex you create, in more complexity you add in a report, and it could be just the DAX calculations, right? Like how are you summarizing and aggregating data? That alone creates kind of dissonance for audiences and going, I think this is what this is. And like, I think we have to be cautious as report authors to not make assumptions that everybody in the audience looking at the page knows exactly what these things are without some sort of representation or supporting information.
Yes.
And I have been part of creating reports where like there are some really significant and hard requirements that have gone into building something, and then at the end of it, we're like, how would our audience ever understand what we're trying to convey?
Yes, exactly.
Right, and there's a lot of that. So it's not just visual based; it's thinking about the entirety of what you're presenting and ensuring that there aren't any like gaps you're leaving so that the audience isn't getting value from them. I guess was my point.
No, I think this is also like, I think this goes both ways, right? On one hand, we're trying to tell the report authors, stay simple, know your audience, simplify as much as you can. On the other hand, we're also telling the report consumers, educate, skill up, knowledge up, learn more about what is possible with visuals, and use visual language as it's a language. Learn how to communicate with that. I think it goes both ways. So I think we're trying to find that happy medium of like the balance between both of those.
Is that something that you've seen? Is that part of some of your data culture initiatives where you're actually having visualization courses? Like that would be a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Start having like in your community town hall or whatever,
Exactly.
walk through how to read a visualization, et cetera. And maybe that's a good way to introduce new visuals into the organization, right? Say, hey, like here's something you're going to see, and here's why we're going to use it. Here's the business value behind it. Where you're going to, and like that would be good for prototype, right? Like as you're building something, utilize a forum to just, walk through it, or a video, right? Like rather than just build documentation, have a video of like, hey, here's this visual in this report. Here's how you read it. Here's how you can interact with it.
And I think that's where that's kind of where I'm going with part of this, is saying this makes sense to have. If we think about like, there needs to be some regular cadence. So this is why the community practice, I think, is important. This is why the center, the person who's leading the helm for all the Power BI pieces, right? So the individual who's doing we will encourage people to leverage Power BI. I'm the executive sponsor. I'm going to push people to kind of educate and learn on things. Great. That's exactly what we should be doing. We should be pushing for people to continue to further what's going on. With that, I really think that this is important to monthly, bi-monthly, someone's thinking through this for your organization. And again, you don't have to know it all. There's a lot of great resources out there. Maybe you do a book study, and maybe you say, look, I'm going to go take a book about visualizations, and as a company or as a team or as people who are doing this regularly, let's all read the book and let's just meet once a month, or let's just meet at lunch and talk about it a little bit more. Like trying to make some culture changes around there that are getting people to think about these things, and just trying to push into it a bit, make it fun, make it enjoyable. But that I think there's a value add there that the companies should invest in. Because what's the penalty? What's the penalty for everyone learning better visual language? Other than your time and the expense to make it happen, I think it raises the bar for a lot of different things. I think it makes people more capable. I think you add more value to the organization. You can communicate more complicated things with more advanced visuals potentially. And maybe you can start drawing your attention away from things that are less meaningful, right? Why are we focusing on these 10 products that make only 1% of our revenue sales? Like people start focusing on the wrong things when we're not leveraging data the right way. Let's focus on the 3 products that make up, 75% of our sales. Let's focus there. Let's spend the effort on them. So, I mean, I've even had this conversation around data quality to make another analogy here, right? Someone says, oh, we've got over 100,000 records that are causing errors. Okay, let's look at this in the grand scheme of things. You've got over 3 billion records. 100,000, not a problem. Like you're talking about a very low error percentage rate on those records. Now, if you have 200,000 records and you have 100,000 errors, like that's 50% of your data issue, right? Focus your attention there. So I think some of this is perspective and scale. And I think by using data and education around data visuals and thinking through data things, you raise that bar and people can focus on what's really important as opposed to potentially some of the remedial things. Thoughts?
Is it a governance thing? And that's where I keep going back, because I'm as this conversation going, and it's like, for me as a consultant doing a single report, sure, I can introduce a visual or I can introduce something flashy whenever I want, so to speak. But from a organization or a BI team, I feel like there's governance on this. No, like there's what visuals are you allowed to use, or kind of staying within a framework, because you can't just introduce a custom visual. That's why they have the organizational settings for custom visuals. If I wanted to introduce the starburst visual, or if I wanted to introduce one of the Sankey diagrams that are available, sure, right? Maybe it makes sense because that particular use case, but which a lot of the custom visuals are a particular use case where the data needs to be formatted a certain way. But if I'm using, let's say, the lollipop chart versus bar chart, or I'm using a box and whisker, right? Do I have to? Does there have to be training, or even more, does it need to be, in a sense, approval?
I mean, I wouldn't call it approval. I would call it. I don't restrict BI developers and say you can't use these visuals, but we do code reviews, right? So /report reviews, So if we're going to build something for, an external or internal customer, well, external especially, but internal, right? You're not just throwing something at somebody without having a team member walk through it with the team member and make sure that we're aligned to everything that the customer is requesting that we solve for them. So I think for me, it's a trade-off. Like you have this type of discussion. Is it worth the type of challenging visual that we presented, and then we need the supporting material or more descriptive words or how to read it or how to visualize it, and then walk through and then make that leap and say, you have to present it to the business user, right? And say, hey, this is our recommendation. Like, this is why we're presenting this in this way. We could do it this other way, which is more simplified, or there may be cases where you can't. Like, if they want to combine multiple different data sets together and that's the best way to visualize, then that there's a training period of like, hey, here's how we do it. What else would we need? Do we need a separate page for other users so that they understand how to use it, et cetera, et cetera? So I don't think there's a carte blanche. I just say you can't use it. I think to some degree it goes through a review process and then ultimately approval process, because it's not like you're doing this in a black box. You're working with the business to make sure that you're solving their problems, not throwing visuals at them that you're just like, here you go. see you later. Right? It's a very back and forth process more often than not, especially internally. You're doing multiple iterations on a report to find the right balance.
I think I like that approach. I don't think governance to me feels too strong of a word, right? I think instead of having a hard set line saying you can't use this, you can use this, you can't, like here, instead of trying to define all that up front, I think it's more around the idea is there's a process to ask, why does this exist? Have we appropriately identified our audience, and will this visual meet the audience's needs? I think there are cases where we want to, I think, as an organization or even a BI developer, you want to push your people a bit and show them things they haven't seen. That's how you initiate some change. But if you push too hard, or if you don't do it with enough support, I think you just frustrate people. So it's this fine line between pushing enough, but not so much that people get annoyed and walk away.
How would it, like, to turn that into a different question? Like,
sure,
I would stifle creativity if I did that.
I would agree. I don't want to do that.
Everything I'm saying here related to, like, you should go learn the lexicon of custom visuals and all the things that are out there. Like, you would be hindering your business, because there are absolutely going to be things that your people find, if they're engaged and looking for those things, that they're going to find solutions for that you otherwise wouldn't have known if you were like, you have to use bar charts and you can only use these line charts. You cannot use the shaded line chart. You have 5 things to pick from, and that's your job. Okay, well, that's not very exciting part of my job anymore, right?
I think you potentially get some brain drain there as well, right? People, smart people who like to build things for you, right?
Yeah.
They'll move on. They'll be like, well, this is not creative enough for me. I'm not challenged in this space because this is one of the main reasons why I left certain industries in mechanical engineering. I was in mechanical engineering for a number of years in the beginning part of my career. And there were some industries I stepped into. I was like, wow, there's literally no creative thinking here. Everything, again, it's for safety of people. And like, I totally understood why it existed. But on the other hand, I'm like, I don't want something that's kind of, here's the cookbook, just follow the recipe and you get an output that's the same every time. Like, that's awesome. And it's a good process. I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things, but I really wanted to be like challenged and be like, give me no rules. Give me an empty room, a black box, a blank canvas. That's where I liked to be. Some people don't operate that way. Some people don't play in that realm. They just want their set of rules. And, you give me those rules and I'll play by the rules. So I think potentially that is some of your personality as well. I always have an interesting thought here, Tommy. Like, I feel like a lot of what you focus on is, and maybe this is just your personality or perspective on things, but I feel like a lot of things are like fall into the realm of governance and fall into the realm of, if we set a rule about it, that's how it works. Does that resonate with? I feel like that resonates with you. Like that, like, give Tommy rules. Like, these are the bounds by which we play around. That's how we govern things.
I think it's because I made those mistakes, or I was burned as a data analyst and kind of being rogue
Okay.
with building reports where I'm like,
Okay.
yeah, I can trust new, and especially when the I wouldn't call it like that I'm still scarred from like the very beginning learning Power BI, but when Power BI first came out, when I learned something, I was gonna
Yeah.
put it in
Go do it.
and
Yeah.
and
Add it
then
in there right away. Yeah.
right.
hmm
But that quickly devolved where I thought it was cool, but everyone using the reports was completely overwhelmed.
So this is a great point and question. I want to dig into that point a little bit, Tommy. From your perspective, do you think that reaction to your reports would have been better had you done some more education or provided some more documentation up front? Or let me ask this, what if you built the very simplified version of that report page and added the complexity or the features on a separate page?
Hmm.
How
And
do you think what you would have built would have been received had you done one or both of those things?
definitely going to work out a little better, probably, but because I was building that into like basically whatever was production,
Yep.
um, and obviously did not work terribly well.
Did you let me ask this question. Did you have like again, I think we've all kind of done this, especially when Power BI didn't have anything like deployment pipelines, like the meme that I work in prod, like I only do work in prod, kind of is true for the business, right? When you think about the business, there is no concept of dev and test. Like, hey, Mike, build a report. Okay, done. Like, ship it. That was my phrase for a long time. Like, when something's done, just push it to production because it's good enough. And if something's broken, we'll just fix it later and then, reissue an update, right? I don't think that's tolerated. But, Tommy, to your point, did you have a test environment? Was there like, early testing of things and pushing those off to people for initial reviews and reactions?
Honestly, when it came to adding new visuals, because I loved like when the Starburst came out, or
Hmm?
what I people there was no, hey, what does this do? There was just no reaction, there was no reply, and then it was just people would find a table, because it was just too much.
Mhm.
So it basically immediately went the other way.
But this was, to me, this speaks to the gap between what you were thinking about and what the user of the report could think about, right? They were still focusing on, I need a table of data because I've got to pull the data out and stick it in Excel so I can do some analysis on it. Like, they were still thinking about their existing process. You had already gone like 3 or 4 or 5 steps ahead of them and said, look, what you're trying to get to is, here's the insight. Here's a visual that represents the output of a lot of thoughts. Here's where we need to focus our attention. Look at this page, go do actions from it. And they weren't there yet. They weren't able to trust the data and read and visually understand. You were writing a book. You were writing Pride and Prejudice, and they were trying to read, I don't know, a picture book, right? Maybe there was a gap there. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. But again, anyone can go rogue. So in terms of adding the random visuals or just the different layout, where as much as I want that creativity, this is going to be the constant struggle for me. Where do you want everything just to be too basic, or like where everything's the bar chart, and everything looks more or less the same? But I think it's just looking at those visuals and when is it a better representation?
Well, I think that the data and the insights are going to drive that conversation, right? Like, you will find there will be a point in time where it's not like a bar chart would work, but this other visual would be better. And if it is better, what is it adding more complexity to the end user? And if the answer is yes, then like what we're saying, and I think everybody agreed to here, is you have to be more intentional about how you bring the audience along. And as we dissect your previous life, I guess, like to some degrees, it sounded like, yeah, you were in a spot where you're just firing the new stuff out there because it was cool. You looked at the data in completely different ways. And that leads, like, I guess, to a couple thoughts around that for the audience, right? This is why it's so important to work with somebody, right? As opposed to just being the lone wolf that does
That's
everything.
a good point.
Because
Yeah.
in your own world, like, what's one of the best ways you could have checked and balanced that? You vetted against somebody. It's like that's why a team is good, because you're running an idea or a process past somebody before you bring it to the business. Second, I think we've talked about levels of, I'm losing the word. like literacy. You could, it was just, it wasn't
Yeah.
what I was looking for. The data literacy of uh, business users.
Mhm.
We've talked about leveling that, right, before reporting, because how do you go engage with them? How do you build a report? And many times what I'm hearing from you, Tommy, is, oh, it almost sounds like these people were like, they'd never gotten to the analysis part of how they want to look at the data. So they were always just give me the table. They were probably ripping the table out and then going to Excel and doing their own pivot charts and pivot tables, etc. But it speaks, I think, to a conversation I just had yesterday, where someone's requesting that we go pull a bunch of data for them, and didn't really have any idea of any visualization, or it was just data. And then during that conversation, you hear things like, yeah, and I'll start to track that over time, and yada yada. And it's like, wait, hold on,
Slow down. What are we
hold on.
doing? Yeah.
What are you going to do with this data? Oh, well, I'm gonna run it like every 2 weeks or a month, right? And then I'm like, and are you going to start tracking that in an Excel file, and you're gonna build your own report off it? Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. Why? Like, it's my biggest pet peeve. But it's my biggest pet peeve because we talk at nauseum about virtuous waste. That is the definition of people wasting their time. If you are asking a team to dump data out for you, that same team can do all of the steps that you would do with that data in an automated fashion and give you a report. So instead, yeah, we're going to produce the data, but there's a phase 2 here. Business person, you need to go and you need to look at that data, because you need to familiarize yourself with it to see what insights you would want to derive from it, or what shortcuts, right?
Mhm.
Now we're in bar chart land, right? Can I categorize this data for you? Do you want to see this data change over time? What are the things you want to? So here's your data, but this is phase 1. Phase 2 is, I'm not going to give you this in report form. I'm going to generate this once or twice for you. Then we're going to come back and you're going to present, like, you're going to have a different request that is actually going to solve your problem and the problem for everybody else looking at this data. And it almost sounds like we didn't come upon that kind of theory and process and thinking through things until after, I think. But it almost, like, otherwise, what do you have, right? You have people who understand data segmentation, the tool sets, how to filter, how to use, the value behind how fast people can come to insights. It was like you were presenting all that, and people were still like, this is just noise to me. It doesn't make any sense. Just give me my table of data, because I'm going to go do these things. And it's highly likely those things were exactly the same ones that you were doing and giving them the value in the reports. And you just had this disconnect, which is, I think, important for people to walk people through that process and bring them along for the ride, and not just think that, hey, because we know we did all of these steps and we understand how it all worked. Every one of those steps to transform and change and modify data is a disconnect for the audience unless they understand how that works. How did you go from, like, garbage data over here where we have, 500 buckets, and you gave me 4 concise buckets out of those 500? Well, because I transformed and changed and add this business lot, right? You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
But we just automatically are on this side going, well, here's your 4 buckets, and it's summarized by this and this and this. And we didn't bring them along for the ride.
Mhm.
So I think that's just as important for us to, convey or have, supporting documentation for a report, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot more to communicating insights than just throwing visuals on a page at people.
I think we're almost like that. That's like the ending point. I think it's like, that's it. We're trying to convey more than just dropping visuals on the page. To me, it's a lot around bringing people along for the ride, right? It's educating as you go, making sure people understand, like, the concepts of what we're trying to go after and how to bring people along for that ride. Love it. Any other final thoughts, Tommy, that you want to go here before we start kind of wrapping?
I think the idea of the test page, or let's say, like, just like we can do with the app audiences that we've really discovered, trying to utilize as much as possible, let's say, like, either advanced features or even like AI functionality, the decomposition tree. If you are introducing that, and I think we should be making effort to introduce, we should probably include that as dev pages, but make a conscious decision to do that.
I think so. And I think it's also an idea of like, if we bring things to the business or teams of people who are looking at reports, test stuff out. Does this make sense to you? Ask for feedback. I think that's, I mean, we don't have to do this in a vacuum. It's, you know, we can shape what we're doing. And I do think there is opportunities. I think there's a lot of opportunity here where you push into people and say, here's what I think you need to see. Here's a chart that represents something that's a bit more than what you're thinking. What do you think? Does this make sense? Would users understand this? Do you understand it? Maybe we keep it as, you know, like maybe we don't lead with that image. Maybe we lead with something else that does something a bit more simple in nature. And maybe that's also part of the report as well. So I think there's opportunity for creativity. But I definitely say I would fall on Seth's side of this, as I wouldn't stifle the creativity. I want people to think creatively about things. Awesome.
Yeah, I would just big thanks again to Storytelling with Data. They do a great job, that whole team, and Mike Cisneros for the thought-provoking article for the conversation today. It was good.
Yeah, very good. Good conversation. With that, you've wasted, invested? I don't know what you want to call it. Okay, we'll go with invested today. You've invested another hour of your time. Thank you very much for listening with us. I hope your run or walk or whatever you're doing, if you're listening to us online, as opposed to watching it live now, we thank you very much for your ears and your listenership. This is very helpful. Our only recommendation is if you like this conversation, if you thought there were some thought-provoking pieces of this, please share it with somebody else. Also, go check out things from the Storytelling with Data. It's an amazing company. They're doing some really great education around visualizations. I'm learning a lot from them. So I would also recommend, Storytelling with Data, check them out. Go look at what they're doing, because they're doing some really neat things as well. So with that, Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Do you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to Power BI Tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. Finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all Power BI Tips social media channels.
With that, we'll say thank you, and we'll see you next time.